like to begin by saying that we're reflecting on inequality and injustice on land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians and pay tribute to their spirit of collective dreaming, collective resistance and collective hope. Our history is laden with the long and violent act of dispossession, of forcefully taking members of the First Peoples away from their homes. Sacred places have been trampled on, lives destroyed, cultures crushed, families scattered. And I would like to say, for the record, in response to comments by the Prime Minister, that being colonised is never a lifestyle choice. It's sad to see budget 2015 being measured against budget 2014 instead of being measured by its impact on inequality and poverty. The 2014 measures, such as the one to force young people experiencing unemployment to survive on fresh air and sunshine for 6 months of every year, was sheer viciousness. Budget 2015 proposes 1 month without income instead of 6. This change is a clear admission of the cruelty of this measure without actually abandoning it. And we're supposed to be grateful. That's a bit like saying you should thank someone for only cutting your fingers off after threatening to cut off your arm. Budget 2015 might be constructed as being dull, but it doesn't dull the pain for the people who struggle to make ends meet while a government presides over a growth in inequality and unemployment. It doesn't dull the pain because it refuses to make the big end of town pay its share through progressive tax reform. It can find the money to fund childcare and nannies for the rich, but only at the expense of the poor. It refuses to lift the abysmally low unemployment benefit, resorting to income management instead of income adequacy. It doesn't dull the pain because it refuses to reinstate and increase funding for social services, social housing, public health and public education slashed in last year's budget. The problem with unemployment lies not with the individual, but with the labour market. Government has to do what markets cannot. And if government wants to address unemployment, it will create a jobs plan. No amount of moralising about sole parents or young people needing to have a go will address the fact that there are 13 job seekers for every job vacancy if you factor in the unemployed and the underemployed. Neither sticks, even when they're allegedly shortened, nor baby carrots will actually create jobs. Ideology dressed up as rationality doesn't dull the pain, let alone address the causes of the pain for the forgotten people. The low paid, the unpaid, the unemployed and the underemployed. But it does dull this nation's vision of itself, because this year's budget, by continuing to ramp up inequality, will force people to rely on charity when all they want is a fair crack at happiness. Now you're looking very serious here, and that's maybe a good thing, but I just want to share a little story with you to lighten your load a little bit, my brothers and sisters, because you're looking very serious here. What do I mean by our nation's vision of itself? Well, you know, everyone here tonight, I am absolutely certain, is here because you believe passionately in social justice, whatever that means to you and how you live that out, but that's why you're here. And really, how can we say we have a vision of ourselves as a nation unless we're really willing to fight for it? If all we are wanting to do is to sit back and consume and to look after ourselves as individuals without fighting collectively for a better kind of society, what kind of claim can we have to having a vision? But of course that's dangerous. And I'll just share a little story from my immediate family on the dangers involved in engaging in that struggle for social justice as all of us have in this room. And I'm sure you've got similar stories. My partner and I have two children, they're now 16 and 18, but this story occurs when they were probably, they were probably about 4 and 6 or something. And it was one night, we were living in the Blue Mountains before we moved to Canberra, and the children asked me if they could watch a DVD after dinner. And I said no, because I'm a totalitarian dictator as a father. I said no, you may not. And they then tried to badger me and cajole me and sort of say, yeah, please, we promise we'll go straight to bed. And I said, no, it's a school night. You could always use that as a school night. That's why you can't do X, Y, Z. And I was very firm. I was very proud of myself for not buckling under the pressure and being the big softie that I usually am. And so then they did something that was deeply, deeply disturbing. They went into the corner of the dining room and they caucused. And within moments, they leapt to their feet and started marching around the dining room table chanting, "The children united will never be defeated." My partner Jackie gave me a withering look, as if to say, "You are so to blame." And I gave her a very gentle look back and said, "Darling, that slogan reminds me very much of one that they might have heard when one of them was 2 years old and the other was in utero, and you, I believe, were on the back of a ute with a bullhorn outside Peter Reith business breakfast." She had no comeback. This is what I mean by the struggle. I mean taking joy in the everyday, but never forgetting what our goals are, what our vision is, even when we feel like we're hitting our heads against a wall. And people often say to me, John, don't you feel a sense of despair when you see both sides of politics at times embracing visions and policies that so sell us short as a society? And I guess my feeling is, the people who are humiliated and crushed by those policies, they never cease to inspire and amaze me, because I see there sometimes even the tiniest nugget of hope. And I think to myself, what right have I got to indulge in the luxury of despair when all that many people have, from the first peoples to the most recent arrivals as asylum seekers and everyone in between, when many people are just living from day to day with nothing but the tiniest nugget of hope, not necessarily for big visions, but that, the single mum being able to put dinner on the table that night, or being able to pay for the school excursion the next day, or the young person desperately hoping to pick up an apprenticeship, or all of these little things that make up what it is that we dream of and aspire to as a society. Because there's nothing human about humiliating people because they're forced to survive on the fringes, on the margins of the labour market, or on the margins of society. And it was the feminist movement that gave us that beautiful and powerful insight that the personal is political. And I think this is something we should never take for granted, and we should never underestimate the power of. Because what that means is our task is to transform all of our personal stories and the stories that are entrusted to us by the people we work with and have the privilege to stand in solidarity with, to transform these personal stories into that powerful collective struggle for a new society. A society in which people aren't blamed because economic structures lock them out, or in some cases lock them up. And it's heartbreaking, of course. Just the other week we saw that report that the rate of Indigenous youth unemployment, of Indigenous youth incarceration is the highest it's been since the 1991 report from the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. I mean, shame on us if we couldn't improve that. We dream of a society in which people aren't told that they wouldn't be poor if only they chose to be a little bit more productive, or if that they would be able to break into to have a house if only they got off their backsides and got a job that paid well. No, how can I comment? I haven't even touched that one. Government walks away from its responsibility to its people and shies away from the challenge to build a more sustainable and long-term revenue base when it refuses to guarantee access to the essentials of life for everyone. And I'm not talking luxury, I'm talking a place to live, a place to work, and if you can't work, then income adequacy, not a humiliating level of income support that leaves you having to depend on the St Vincent de Paul Society or the Salvation Army as the default mode of delivering social security. I mean, shame on us again as a nation. We were one of the most progressive nations on the planet when it came to our social security system, and now look what we've become. A place to learn and a place to heal. This is not a matter of charity towards the disadvantaged, it's a matter of class. Warren Buffett was quite correct when he commented, there's class warfare all right, he said, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war and we're winning. Now I know them's dangerous words, and you know, I'm going to be accused of all sorts of things by quoting them, even though they're not mine. I'm just simply quoting Warren Buffett, and he must be right because he's worked very hard and is able to buy whatever house he wants. But let me tell you, when I first started working for Vinnie's, it was in 2001 as the National Research Officer, and about a year and a half into the job, I had the quite frightening experience of being outed in that highly esteemed academic journal, Sydney's Daily Telegraph, as evidence of the communist control of the St Vincent de Paul Society in an article by Michael Duffy, which began Comrade Falzon and Comrade Wicks, who was one of an economist who was a volunteer for Vinnie's, have been reading more Das Kapital than the Bible. And I thought, oh, okay, well, and then it went on to mangle a paper I'd given on unemployment at the University of Newcastle. And I actually had called for a national plan to combat poverty, but this column presented that I was calling for Soviet-style command economy. Slightly different things, but you know, arguably a bit of overlap there. I'm not coming down one side or the other. Anyway, I thought, well, I loved working for Vinnie's. They were a great organisation, but I'm afraid that the time has obviously come for me to leave, because I'm obviously not going to be patted on the back for this one. So it was Terry McCarthy, who was the then chair of our National Social Justice Committee, who ran me. He taught me a great deal, you know. He was a former ambassador and all the rest of it, and he really knew how to work the political system. But on this occasion, he ran me and he said, Falzon, you know, you've got a copy of the Daily Telegraph? And I said, no, Terry, I don't usually read it. And he goes, well, you better go and bloody buy one, you know, and then consider your position, or something like that. And I'm thinking, well, so I considered my position, and I immediately rang our national president and said to him, our president at the time was a Scottish gentleman, John Meehan, based in Perth, and I said, John, this has been written, and you'll have my resignation. This was on a Saturday. You'll have my resignation on your desk on Monday. And I'm sorry, people. I'm Maltese. I've got every right to make fun of my own people, and absolutely no right to try and do a Scottish accent. It's politically incorrect. But I can't retell the story without doing it, because that's the way I remember it. It's a really crap Scottish accent, I have to warn you. It sounds a little bit of a cross between Indian and Italian, but who's judging? So I said that, and he goes, have you done anything wrong? What do you reckon, 3 out of 10 or something? 2 maybe. All right. And I said, well, that's for you to judge and others, but certainly I've said nothing that I take back, nothing that I resolve from. And he said, right, draft me a letter to the editor. Sorry. I'll be better doing it with the glass of water. Draft me a letter to the editor. And so I was able to do that. The letter was published over John's name, and it gave me the opportunity to quote those beautiful words from the Brazilian Archbishop Helder Camara, who came from a very wealthy background but was conscientised, taught by the very poor in the northeast of Brazil in Recife. And he famously said, when I give bread to the poor, I'm called a saint. But when I ask why they have no bread, I'm called a communist. And it was a wonderful moment for Vinnie's, because the membership started feeling galvanised, saying, hang on, we're not going to be silenced. We're not going to be bullied. We're going to speak up. We don't care if people call us names. And it was a beautiful, beautiful testimony to grassroots activism for me, and I learned a lot from it. It's life that teaches us that really it doesn't matter what you're called, because an injury to one is an injury to all. And in the face of these injuries, our best weapon, our secret weapon, our only weapon has to be our solidarity. We don't need to resort to lies. We don't need to resort to bullying. We have the truth, and we just need to express it through our solidarity with each other. We're injured when government on behalf of the rich steals from the poor, but that's what it means to rip $1 billion out of social services whilst refusing to make the mega corporations and high wealth individuals pay their share. We're injured when unemployment and underemployment are blamed on the individual instead of fixed by the government. We're injured when instead of a jobs plan, we're served a putting the boot into the unemployed plan, and a ripping up the minimum wage and penalty rates plan, in other words, a family paying plan. We're injured when universal healthcare is hammered, when public education is attacked, when TAFE is undermined, when universities are deregulated. We're injured when the common good is dismembered, when people are forced into poverty, forced to rely on charity, when all they long for is justice. We're injured when the maximisation of profits takes priority over the rights of workers, including the residualised and discarded people that have been pushed out and left out of the labour market. The long, fruitless wait of the excluded for some of the wealth to trickle down is one of the most audacious con jobs in modern history. We all know that our economic system is not built on the objective of the wealth trickling down, but on the certainty that wealth bubbles up. In the meantime, the excluded are told to be patient, that their time will come. Once we've got the budget back into surplus, once we've paid the debt, once we've stopped the boats and cut the taxes, they'll only need to wait a little bit longer. But who are the excluded? Who are the people that are being told to wait? I'll share another little story with you, because I saw the seriousness on your faces again. I have to make a confession. I'm directionally challenged. I get lost everywhere. I had a wonderful walk in Hobart this afternoon and got lost, and it was great, extra exercise which I needed because I ate this delicious scallop pie, but now I'm giving you too many details. But I get lost all the time. I'm in Parliament House in Canberra just about every week, particularly when Parliament is sitting, and I inevitably get lost. I have to say, despite all of the stereotypes about the political class, people are extraordinarily kind to me. Members of Parliament, advisors, staffers, hospitality, catering staff, security staff, admin staff, everyone is extraordinarily kind when they see me wandering around lost. On one occasion late last year, I was typically lost, and a security guy was standing next to me as I was standing in front of the lift, and he goes, "Mate, what are you looking for?" And I said, "Oh, this room, mate." He goes, "Well, for a start, mate, you're on the wrong floor." And I said, yeah, because I'm directionally challenged and I always get lost, mate. And he goes, look mate, I'll take you there. And this is typical. People not only give me directions, but they know that I'll stuff them up if they do, so they actually walk me there and actually deliver me into the door usually. So we're standing in the lift and he looks at my security pass and he says, so where are you from, mate? And I said, he goes, St Vincent de Paul. I said, yeah, mate. He goes, you're from Vinny? I said, yeah. He goes, mate, let me give you a hug. Mate, I want to just say thank you, as if I've done anything for this. I'm getting all the thanks, which was just beautiful. He goes, mate, he said, you helped me out when I was down there, no one else was willing to help me. And he goes, mate, he said, I've got my act together a bit now, I've got this job here, I've got a few things to work out, but I only got my shit together and it's good, mate, it's good. I said, well, good on you, mate. And he said, mate, let me tell you what happened. He said, I was unemployed, I had a really bad stretch, all sorts of stuff I won't go into. He said, I was living in Nowra and Centrelink sent me for a job interview in Wollongong. And I went to the interview, and then I found myself stranded. I didn't even have, money to buy a cup of tea and a pie and the train home. And he said, I thought to myself, what should I do? Where should I go? And he said, and then I realised, he said, I thought to myself, and he goes, you said Vinnie's, didn't you? And I said, yeah. He goes, oh, actually it was Salvo's. He said, you don't mind, do you? And I said, actually I do, mate. I said, I don't want to tell you good news stories about the competition. He goes, that's a joke, right? And I said, yeah, mate, that's a joke. He goes, anyway, we became good mates and everything. Anyway, a week later, I had lunch with the National Secretary of the Salvation Army, lovely guy. And I said, Kelvin, I've got a story for you, mate. And I told him, and he said, I can do one better than that, John. I said, how can you do one better than that, Kelvin? I mean, that aces everything. And he goes, no. And I said, yeah, come on, okay. And he goes, I know the bloke you're talking about because in the meantime, he's found me in the Parliament House. And he said, not only did he find me, and he could recognise me, John, because I wear a uniform, unlike Vinnie's, you want to get with the program. And he said, and this guy came and told me his story, and then he whipped out an envelope with money in it and asked me to send it to the Salvation Army branch that helped him out when he needed the help. Now, that's who the excluded are. They're told to wait, but once they have the opportunity, they don't wait to give back. And that's why it's so hurtful to see people being demonised as if they're the leaners. They ain't the leaners, let me assure you. When you've got a rich country like ours, supposedly unable to afford to ensure that more than 100,000 people experiencing homelessness or more than 200,000 people on the waiting list for social housing have a place to call home, that's not a misfortune and it's not a mistake. It's the sound of the excluded still waiting. When you've got 800,000 people unemployed, 1 million underemployed, on top of those who are about to lose their jobs, particularly due to the mutilation of the public service and government cuts to social spending, and when you've got a single New Start payment that sits at around only 40% of the minimum wage, that's the sound of the excluded still waiting. When you've got David Gonski, not generally seen as representing the vanguard of the working class, working alongside his fellow panellists to recommend a package of education funding reforms to address the outrageous inequality that besmirches education funding in Australia, and then the government does a triple backflip and declares it's not committed to seeing through this redistribution of resources, you loudly hear the sound of the excluded still waiting. Disability advocates have long made the excellent point that the construction of disability largely depends on how we structure our society and our economy. They point out very logically that if you can't walk up the steps, literally, we can decide as a society that it's tough luck or even that you're to blame, or we can just build a ramp. And the same goes for every other experience of exclusion. Unemployment, for example, is painted as a moral failure. The causes, however, are structural, not personal. And we need to be honest about the fact that not only do we refuse to build the ramps, we actually do the opposite. We build bloody great walls. And then we condemn the people that we've built the walls around for allegedly lacking the aspiration to scale them. For many of us, our day-to-day work is involved with helping people scale those walls, and that's good. But our task, our historic task, has to be to tear the walls down. Tackling inequality means investing in high quality social and economic infrastructure for the benefit of everyone. In 2004, Tom Calma, the then Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, explained the difference between formal and substantive equality. He said if there are two people down two different wells, one of them's 10 metres deep and the other one's 5 metres deep, if you threw 5 metres rope to each of them, you're according them only formal equality. Formal equality will never deliver fairness. Substantive equality means that each one gets the length of rope that they need. In other words, everyone, what we need is to make sure if we want to tackle inequality, it means giving everyone enough rope. Or another way of putting it is from each according to their ability and to each according to their needs. A German social theorist came up with that one, but I forgot his name. As things stand, we give more than enough rope to the people who stand above the wells, while leaving those who are stuck down the wells with nothing but the view from below and the dream of sunlight. Social spending, regardless of the screams of blue murder from those who have enough rope, does help build equality. We know that from the international data. And that's not just good for the people stuck down the wells, it's good for everyone, because the higher the level of inequality, the higher the rate of crime, mortality, physical and mental illness. Inequality is literally bad for our health. As the World Health Organization in its 2008 report on the social determinants of health stated, social injustice is killing people on a grand scale. But inequality isn't just about a redistribution of fighting inequality, isn't just about a redistribution of resources and wealth. It's got to also be about a redistribution of hope and a redistribution of power. As the Reverend Dr Jenyini Gondara put it so eloquently in regards to the Northern Territory intervention, he said, people are sick and tired of being controlled. When people are sick and tired of control, they just give up hope. People are dying, not just spiritually and emotionally, but physically. They cannot live for the day because their lives are controlled by somebody else. It's clear as day. You don't build a community up by putting its people down. You only achieve humiliation. And as the former Spanish Prime Minister said, a good society is one that does not humiliate its members. Humiliation begets disempowerment or rage. And we can condemn and humiliate people for not being able to get up the steps, or we can build a ramp. But as the history of progressive social change teaches us, humiliation can also turn into revolution under the guiding stars of struggle and hope. Because the truth spoken by the people pushed to the margins will always in the end drown out the lies told about them. New forces and new passions spring up in the bosom of society, but the old social organisation fetters them and keeps them down. But first, polarisation becomes more pronounced. If as a society we are comfortable with detaining and brutalising children and their parents because carrying with them nothing but that tiny nugget of hope they take to the high seas in search of a safe haven, how can we be surprised that we are also apparently at peace with the prospect of more stolen generations of Aboriginal people, more paternalistic interventions in their lives, more deaths in custody? If we accept the lie that government should withdraw from the arena in which inequality needs to be battled, how can we be surprised at the marketisation of essential services, the not-for-profits unwittingly clearing the path for multinational companies to take over the space and put profits before people? Why would we be surprised if we end up building more private prisons instead of more public schools? As the great anti-prison activist Angela Davis always said, prisons don't disappear problems, prisons disappear human beings. We will for some time, sadly, be forced to listen to the late Baroness Thatcher being channelled down here in the colonies. She who opined that, and again, can't do that, but I was born in London, so different part of London. Yeah. She said, "It is our job." I'm sorry, it was so. "It is our job to glory in inequality," she said, "and see that talents and abilities are given vent and expression for the benefit of us all." Now, this is fascinating. Those who argue that inequality is actually good for us intentionally confuse inequality with diversity. The talents and abilities that should indeed be given free expression for the benefit of us all are the manifestation of diversity, not the product of inequality, as perversely claimed in the Thatcherite thesis. And it is an injustice to all of us, especially when young people and children are denied the resources to actually give free expression to their abilities and talents. But that's exactly the logic of the market. This glorification of inequality exemplified monumentally in the bizarre notion that health or education are commodities for sale, that your educational opportunities or your health outcomes should correlate with your class, which is exactly what we know to be the all too sad reality that we're living in and struggling to transform. We have only one enemy. It's called inequality. And we're here because we're ready to take it on. And no matter how long it takes, we will win against this enemy. This is our beautiful struggle. We who are very, very many, we who make up the massive and diverse movement for progressive social change, a movement that finds its history in the coming together and rising up of the crushed and the cursed, the excluded and exploited, and finds its expression in our common belief that those who refuse to take the side of the oppressed give their aid to the oppressor. We also hold with the Indian writer and activist Arundhati Roy that there's no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced and the preferably unheard. What we know and what we learn by listening to the language of the unheard, instead of swallowing the lies of those who seek to justify their harm to humanity and to the planet in which humanity finds its home. Humanity will win against humiliation, for our solidarity is always going to be stronger than our sadness. And even though our struggle is enormous, so too is our hope. And on this note of the beautiful struggle, I'll leave you with the words of the late great Bobby Sykes, who said, "The revolution is alive while it lives within us, beating, making our hearts warm, our minds strong, for we know that justice is inevitable like birth."